All right, hello, and welcome to today's webinar, From Friction to Force Multiplier, Making Security a True Business Enabler. Today's webinar is sponsored by RunSafe Security. My name is Chris McNamara. I'm head of content with Automation World. I'm thrilled to have you join us here today. We have a very interesting topic with a bunch of smart people, and I'm excited to dive into it. A little housekeeping first. The webinar has started. If you can't hear me speaking, you can check to make sure your computer mute button is not turned to off. You can log off and log back in or refresh your browser if you're having problems. If you still can't hear me or you're having other difficulties, you can contact tech support by typing your message in the Q&A window on the screen, and our technical experts will assist you. Or you can press the question mark help button in the upper right-hand corner to receive assistance in resolving common issues. This webinar technology allows you to resize the presentation window by clicking the maximize icon in the upper right corner to enlarge the window. Similarly, we welcome your questions during the presentation today. We've got a Q&A section at the back end. We'd love that to be a very active dialogue after the main dialogue section of the presentation here today. And we'll try to get to those as many as possible. You can send in your questions at any time during the webinar. To do so, simply type your question in the Q&A window on your screen and hit the submit button. Additionally, you can refer to the resources window on your screen for valuable content from our sponsor. We'll touch back on that at the end of the presentation here today. And lastly, please be aware that today's session is being recorded and it will be available on the Automation World website within a day. You'll be notified via email when that archive is available. So let's get right into it. Many teams still experience security as something that slows innovation or creates friction between engineering operations and business priorities. Perhaps your team is one of those. Today, we're going to focus on how organizations can rethink security as a business enabler to support resilience and operational continuity and innovation rather than constraining it, making security truly a win. Our goal is for you webinar attendees to gain actionable insights into the concept of shifting security left, scaling risk management across the software supply chain, and embedding resilience into systems by design, doing it strategically. So ultimately, we're going to demonstrate how organizations can move from reactive security postures to proactive strategies that accelerate innovation, strengthen trust, and turn security into a measurable force multiplier. All good things. Let me introduce our speakers today. First off, we have Nikola Dalcekovic, Division CSO, Cybersecurity Executive leading Security Strategy, Prosumer Software with Schneider Electric. We've got Andy Kling, VP of Cybersecurity with Schneider Electric. Pedro Cordeiro, Principal Cybersecurity Engineer, Critical Software. And Joe Saunders, CEO and founder of RunSafe Security. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, let's dive right into it. Let's get off to a fast start. Quick takes from everybody. When organizations treat security as friction, what causes that? What's the problem? What's the root cause of that kind of faulty mindset?
So I think often when we think about cybersecurity as a friction, the challenge that we're faced with is we're holding cybersecurity as something that's separate from the work that's being done. And really, if we can just think about cybersecurity as part of the work that we're doing, if we can incorporate it into our processes, whether you're in deployment mode or whether you're in startup mode or configuration mode, if you just incorporate cybersecurity as parts and steps into that process, it often goes much smoother because you're asking for cybersecurity work to be done where the work is being done. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I've faced in my career as to how to pull cybersecurity into that stream of work that's being done, and I've achieved some of the best adoption successes with cybersecurity in doing that.
Excellent. Yeah. Nikola, let me ask you, where do you find this security friction showing up most commonly? Where do you see it?
Well, I would actually build on what Andy was talking about, but if I needed to kind of outline two key points, it would be security comes too late into the process. So having that conversation between engineering and other departments and security may come too late. And these are in cases where security comes as a stage gate. So that's not inherently a bad thing to have, but if it's the only thing, the only case where we have that discussion, then it's almost like an anti-pattern. So integrating earlier in the process is definitely a key thing to avoid friction. And maybe to sum it up, like the second key point would be how the success is measured, right? So if you don't have measurement of success embedded with security KPIs, it might mean that we steer away from shared outcomes and perspectives. And that's where actually the friction starts growing up. So, from my perspective, I would definitely reevaluate like what is the measure of success and where security fits in, and then have discussions like earlier to eliminate any potential friction.
Interesting. We're talking about where this shows up and at the levels. Pedro, let me ask you, where does security break down most commonly that you see? Is it at the system or the engineering level?
I would say that it would break down mostly at the integration boundary, right? So oftentimes we see components from different vendors, and this is where I think it breaks down. So usually engineers optimize for their own subsystem, but nobody owns the interconnection, the seams. So, and if on top of this you add implicit trust between internal components, unviewed third-party libraries, and security requirements that simply arrive too late, then you have fragility. Certainly you have fragility there. And also I would say that at the configuration and deployment part of things as well. So even well-designed systems degrade over time. So security breaks down not just at the design time, but also during operations.
Okay. This is great in theory. Let's talk about the implementation. What makes it hard to do these things that you just talked about consistently, particularly across large environments? What's the challenge there?
It's not everybody's top priority. Security is not everybody's top priority. Their job is their top priority. So you create friction when you think of trying to bring cybersecurity in as a separate topic. And instead, maybe we should stop talking about cybersecurity directly and instead think about what is the motivation behind cybersecurity? Why are we doing it? And allow teams to think about, oh, if I secure my system, then I'm going to help ensure uptime. I'm going to help protect against ransomware attacks, for example, and that's going to protect my productivity.
Mm-hmm. Andy, let me ask you a question. Oh, sorry, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. From my perspective, a perfect world is you have clear governance, great business metrics, and a very strong software development methodology that makes security, easily adopted. And that's not always the case in every program. And lots of money. So there are constraints to your point. And so I think part of the discriminating thing is, in part, it's the culture. And so to the extent that you can get alignment in those areas and have a culture that values security, then things become less friction. But the reality is you don't always have all those things lined up in every situation or on every product or every program. And so
the link, Joe, back to what you're saying is if an organization is going to value cybersecurity, then they understand why they're doing it.
100%. And then how you incorporate tools into the process becomes much easier for everyone to understand, or the reason why you're adopting certain controls to enable the security that you're looking for.
Interesting. Let's talk about this concept of shifting security left. Nikola, let me ask you, could you quickly define what we mean by that phrase, and what does that look like at scale?
Well, I think when we speak about shifting left, at least I primarily think about when and where decisions are made. So it's not so much about the tool. Like I know that there has been like a lot of marketing, and then the tool vendors would market it as a way like meet where the developers are, get into their workflows, and all of that is correct. I'm kind of completely agreeing to that, but the true shift left is for me like if we can make the decision when it's the cheapest, meaning even before, if possible, the design, and as we go through the SDLC, like design, implementation, testing, production, it gets more and more expensive. So The actual question becomes like, how do we integrate security decisions earlier? And the way to do it is, for me, through the integration of processes. So as Joe mentioned, like, you really need to have mature processes as DLC to begin with, and then you can change it and to adopt the security considerations into it. It doesn't work simply the other way around. And then once you are integrating your security requirements into your SDLC, then you can think about the tooling to scale out those decisions and to make it more automatic, right? So how do we automate those decisions and how we shift them left? Like, just to be more concrete, one of the good examples for me is the concept of architectural decision records. So because it's always about a trade-off. There is a risk and there's other business needs involved. So there will be trade-offs from time to time, but we need to make them earlier. So we don't need to go back and redo something or inherently accept some residual risk. So for me, that's all about shift left paradigm.
Okay. That's a roadmap. Joe, let me ask you, what separates organizations that are doing this properly from those that are struggling? What do we learn from organizations that are shifting left properly in this respect?
I think the ones that can shift left are the ones that have the maturity to have a highly repeatable software development process that includes the security, automation and testing. And I think organizations that have the ability to reproduce processes in an automated fashion are the ones that then have the best chance to have processes to address vulnerabilities further left. And I like the idea of where it's cheapest, because we all know if there's a vulnerability that's out in the field, it's very, very hard to patch systems. It's very hard to get those pushed out. And the cost of that is very, very high. So automated tooling in the software development process that creates the opportunity to fix and resolve vulnerabilities or weaknesses or bugs early in the process. The organizations that have a good means to do that, an automated means to do that, are the ones that are most successful, and a reproducible way to do that on a consistent basis.
Interesting.
And honestly, Joe, where things are headed with AI today, we're going to have to do this faster and faster. So it's not just about shifting left and doing it earlier. It's also doing it more frequently and doing it faster.
Okay. You're talking about aligning engineering, operations, and security on this front without, damaging the. Okay. Interesting. Let's talk. What are some signs of optimism on this front? What are some early signs that you have seen in your working worlds that this is working?
I've seen a couple things. I've seen in, say, the automotive industry, I've seen folks are sharing open source components that can be shared across organizations. But the reason I think that's a good sign is because what it means is people have mature processes to incorporate security into the processes, even coming from the open source community. But for me, also the adoption of things like Yocto and Buildroot and those kinds of things that are leading to highly repeatable, reproducible builds that can tailor, requirements specific for different products that get shipped. That's a great sign, because there's a tremendous opportunity then once you get there that you can then add in security in an automated fashion as well. Yeah,
I agree, Joe. One of the things that I'm seeing that sort of gives me a bright future view, if you will, is changes in the regulatory landscape. And I know everybody's groaning, oh my God, yes, no, the laws that are coming and forcing us to change. But really what they're trying to do is push back on the product suppliers, push back on the system integrators, push back and set a baseline for cybersecurity that's much higher than we have today. Yeah, there's a lot of conformance that we have to go through, and there's going to be a lot of process, and there's going to be some pain early on as these laws are being adopted. But if we can see past that initial investment and get into what it's going to look like in 3-5 years, once we're past some of this, I think there's some great advantages from cybersecurity that are going to happen all the way through the supply chain, all the way through the supply chain, from the moment a product is conceived until it's end of life in a plant somewhere, and taken out of production. And I think that this gives me a lot of hope for cybersecurity to continue to improve.
I'd just like
Excellent.
to add something on top of what Andy just said. So one of the very subtle things that I come across, and I think to myself, well, maybe this is going well, is when I see engineers catching vulnerabilities, not in production, but in the pipeline itself. So they are discussing, they are putting these security questions beforehand without being prompted. This is a very subtle situation, and one that when I come across that, I think, well, maybe things are not going so badly. Let's call it like that.
Interesting. Okay. Let's wrap this up here. Let me ask you another kind of hot take here. What changes when security is treated as part of the operational continuity instead of compliance? What is the ultimate? We're talking about shifting mindsets and processes and things like that. What's the ultimate win here?
I think it's an acknowledgement that quality matters, and that complying might feel like a negative term, but the way I think Andy and Pedro talked about it, it's if we embrace it, if the culture embraces it, and we see it as a business enablement and good for customers, then it becomes part of the culture and part of the process. So for me, that's when it's treated, as part of operational continuity, is when people kind of unify around, hey, this quality does matter, and it is good business.
I agree. Yeah.
No, yeah, definitely. I think it speaks also to the shared outcomes. I briefly mentioned earlier. It's a huge shift in my mind, where it's not something that security asks for or security wants, or it's a compliance thing, or even regulatory, but it's something we as business want to do. It enables the business, so it dramatically shifts conversation. If we can get to a point where security risk or security practices that we embed are actually a component of success for operational continuity, or as a matter of fact, anything that is important for the business, because each business will have slightly different focus or slightly different metrics. So if we can get security to become a part of it, it becomes an enabler. And that's actually where every security leader wants to see, and wants to see that pathway where the shared outcomes are the ones driving the security program.
Interesting. All right, I'm going to give our presenters a moment to catch your breath here. I want to hear from the audience. Let's do our first poll question here. And you can, there it is. Okay. Where is security most commonly introduced in your organization today? We'd love to have you add your thoughts there, attendees here. Where is security most commonly introduced in your organization today? Is it at the early architecture and design state? Is it during development and integration? Is it primarily during testing and compliance review? Or is it mostly after deployment or incident response? So we'll give you a minute to chime in there. And I'd love to get some thoughts. Anyone on the panel here have a take where when you're working with clients?
I want to select them all.
Yep. And yeah, I thought you and I will probably have the same response here. In the SDL and our security development lifecycle, it even starts earlier with requirements. And as Andy already mentioned, all these are becoming very important to ingrain and integrate security requirements in the existing processes. So,
okay.
The only thing I could add to that is if security is always only added at the incident response phase, then something's going wrong. But certainly, you need to have good deployment and good incident response programs in place, because it's inevitable. However, if all of them were there, I'd be very concerned.
Okay. All right. Well, it looks like the vast majority of our respondents said that security is most commonly introduced during development and integrate. Primarily during architecture and design. So that's good. Let me get your feedback. Is that changing? Are we seeing it considered earlier in the process than it was 20 years ago? I would assume so, and that's a good thing, right?
Yes. Oh my goodness, yes. It's definitely being considered earlier. I would even argue that the consideration is highlighting the importance of the supply chain and looking back through your suppliers and saying, looking upstream in that supply chain and saying, this is part of our decision criteria now. It's
Mhm.
not just do you have security, but can it be deployed? What's the usability? What's the cost? What's the effectiveness of the cybersecurity capabilities that you're building into the products that we're going to be employing? So I would say yes. I see this more and more and more.
Good. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk to managing software supply chain risk at scale. Talking about how organizations can best manage growing software complexity and third-party dependencies without slowing innovation. Pedro, let's start with you. Where do you see software supply chain risk showing up? Is it at the system or firmware levels? What do you think?
I would say that generically speaking, generally in open source components. So what I often see is no SBOMs, no vulnerability tracking, no update path. If we look at things like bootloaders, board support packages inherited from vendors, they are never reviewed. So again, the risk is silent because most organizations don't know the risk is there, but it's persistent. And just to get one thing very clear is that rarely these vulnerabilities from the supply chain, they come from direct dependencies. So they come from transitive dependencies, so dependencies of the dependencies. So there's levels of abstraction here. And also one thing to keep in mind is the end of life and the orphaned components. So organizations typically use, let's say, software development kits and other tools that simply get abandoned, right? So the vendor moves on, the product stays in the field for, I don't know, 10, 15 years still. So that's a long window of unpatched, unmonitored exposure with no remediation path, even if you want one. So I would say that would be it.
Okay.
Good point.
Annie, let me ask you, what makes this risk particularly challenging in large industrial environments?
Oh my goodness. So the transitive dependency in large industrial environments, you often have very limited visibility just how far this goes. I mean, think about, you buy an application, it runs on Windows. Windows has largely incorporated Linux into its operating system. The operating system has device drivers and security protocols that it has inherited from somewhere else. This transitive nature of dependency on dependency on dependency all the way through makes it extremely difficult to truly understand where risk lies sometimes. And it's going to take the entire industry, the entire supply chain to work together to sort of unravel this. Yes, SBOM, is going to be part of that, but SBOM often is first order SBOM. We use Windows, not we use Windows that uses this Linux package that calls out to this Linux device driver that was inherited from open source somewhere. So it's going to take work to unwind all of this to say, if a product supplier is consuming something farther upstream that from a vendor, they're going to have to not only consume it, but they're going to have to qualify that vendor. And that vendor we're going to have to require that vendor then does the same to their suppliers. And that supply chain is going to be very complex to unwind. But I mentioned regulations. That's going to be part of the solution. I think visibility, transparency that SBOM brings. Wait a minute, you're using this, so let me go there and look and ask them for their SBOM. That kind of transparency, I think, is going to bring this topic to the table, to the surface, for people to have this conversation around and to dive into.
Interesting, Joe.
And that's what makes
it
big. That makes it big problem. Sorry, go ahead.
No, great. We're talking about gaps in managing that supply chain risk. Joe, With the organizations you work with, what are the most common gaps that you see on that front?
Well, I have to echo Pedro and Andy that organizations ask about transitive dependencies all the time. And I do think having tooling that helps make that available to people, whether that's part of a software bill of materials or other tooling that makes that available and creates that transparency across the supply chain, I think is one of the biggest gaps. And we strive to help illuminate that at RunSafe. I know that's not the point of this discussion, but that is probably one of the bigger areas in industrial systems where there's so many building blocks on which these systems are built, and the ultimate OEM, isn't creating and writing the software for every piece of software, nor do we want them to. That would be inefficient. Products would be expensive. And it would be really, really hard to create any kind of form of standard and quality. But the transitive nature of these dependencies is kind of the other end of the spectrum. And so illuminating those transitive dependencies, having a transparent process to share your bill of materials so that people can act on them and really understand where potential risk is potentially hidden in your supply chain, I think is one of the big gaps.
And Joe, I would just add that in order for all of that to work, and I agree with everything that you said, but in order for it to work, you need some tailwind. You need regulations to push out regulations, push out laws that say you have to produce an SBOM. A product supplier has to produce that ingredients list that's going into the product. And those OEMs, those product suppliers, they have to use standards, and those standards have to declare this is how you're going to produce an SBOM, and this is what's going to be in it. You need those tailwinds because you're building the capability. Right. And it's not enough just to have the capability. You then have to have the drivers behind it to push everybody forward to take these steps.
Interesting.
Totally
let me ask everybody here: how do you decide what to fix first? There's a lot of decisions to be made here. It can be overwhelming. How do you choose where to start?
Yeah, I would chime in here because I think it's very important to consider the impact and the overall risk. Ideally, if potential context of the risk can be expressed in the dollar value. Like what I'm saying is, like, if we have, let's say, somebody responsible or accountable for 10 different offers, it really depends on what's the reachability to customers. What is this feature actually that might be affected, even used or not? And then the technical KPIs as well, such as, is this already exploitable? Has it been seen exploited in the wild? Is it reachable over the internet, or it's more like down the defense in depth architecture? So like those two aspects would be the key. Like, okay, what if it happens? Like, what if this is compromised? Because in many situations there might not be so much consequences. Like, for example, you can have a CVE which in effect has some denial of service, so it can be affected availability of one of your components, which is not maybe ultimately a high risk for anyone. And then you can kind of have all your workforce focusing on something that might not, in the context of our offer, be so much impactful. So I would always start with a question like, what if it happens? Like, what if this fails? And then to try to map it to the dollar amount that we would get affected. And then at the last step, I would say technically, like, how possible is this? Like, what's the likelihood here? And those three, like, if we can do that in an automated way, that's the best. And yeah, to also circle back on the points made earlier by Andy and Joe, I would also kind of 100% agree with everything said there. But what I'm also worried about in the industry is like alert fatigue. There is so many CVEs these days, and sometimes customer may scan some of the products, and even though the vendors or OEMs did a due diligence and confirmed that some of these are not exploitable or not even reachable by the source code, like especially those transitive dependencies that Pedro was telling us about, we get a false sense of critical risk in one of our offers, while we did the due diligence and there's absolutely no risk, for example. So that's where I see that the regulatory push may actually cause some friction between the vendors and the customers. And the second point is also, like, I know we didn't open this up today, but what about 0 days in open source, right? So we need to rethink our threat models, like what would be our composite control if we get to have some supply chain attack like we are seeing recently, and if there is an exploit from the thing that does not have CV associated with it. So I think that's also very, very important point when we talk about supply chain security.
Nikola, you just touched on automation here. Joe, let me pivot to you here. Where is automation making the biggest difference in managing this at scale in particular?
Well, I think I really appreciate Nikola's points. And if I may just take a sidestep for a second, and that is, I've been inspired by all places, if you can imagine this, loyalty marketing and retail. And you might say, what the heck does that have to do with cybersecurity? But loyalty marketing and retail hits on recency, frequency, and monetary value of a customer. And when I'm thinking about what Nikola has said in my own inspiration for security for RunSafe, I think about severity, exploitability, and reachability. And I think those three elements add up to, the point that Nikola is saying. And so for me, if we can have automation that really does provide insight around severity, exploitability, and reachability, it really helps people prioritize the vulnerabilities that matter. And that automation would make a big difference. And of course, to Andy's point, there needs to be sort of regulatory drivers related to this, but it also can be a good world for organizations. And I think about, okay, so Nikola makes a point. What if there's a 0 day and that doesn't hit the recency or the severity, reachability, and exploitability? Well, we need to have a paradigm shift in our mindset on how to protect systems in the first place. We have to make systems immune from eliminate entire classes of vulnerabilities instead of trying to chase them after they're discovered. And the problem is, in a world of AI where we're releasing vulnerabilities faster at machine speed, faster than we can patch or identify, or let alone automate, we need to have protections in place before the vulnerability is discovered. And so in that regard, I think everyone would run safe, if I can be so silly and add that in there. But to run safe, we need to understand severity, reachability, and exploitability, do that in an automated way, and make systems immune from entire classes of attacks in automated ways as well, so that people can focus on innovation and feature development.
Excellent. I'm keeping an eye on the clock here. Let's get on to the next topic here, talking about designing for resilience and business continuity, specifically embedding resilience into systems and operations by design. Let me ask you, maybe Nikola, what does resilience by design look like in practice for industrial systems? Can you kind of explain that?
Yeah, well, for me, like it can take many shapes and forms when we speak about resilience, but I'll try my best to kind of focus on product security here, not the overall, like the enterprise resilience.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to product, I really think we need to start assuming failure of controls, and that's where I had many discussions around, in past years around defense in depth. Because there is that innate feeling of being covered with one or two controls, and then maybe ignoring some of the potential problems down the attack path. And I know whenever we have these discussions, sometimes it's really even hard to convince the development workforce about thinking and assuming the failure. So for me, the resilience is all about defense in depth. And what happens if it fails? Like, do we degrade gracefully performance or maybe feature set within the product? Or is it more like, we are experiencing operational disruption? So if we can design our systems to be more in the first category of degrading gracefully, and thinking about how we can assume the breach has happened and the attacker was successful in the previous step, and building defenses. So that also is very important to set based on the context of the offer. Like, it's not one size fits all, definitely, But if you're having like critical offers, that's where you want to have, again, shared outcome with the leadership and say like, this would be the outcome of having a resilient offer. And to achieve that, defense in depth should become our principle. And what defense in depth means, like how long down the chain do we really go for? And once we have it adopted in the design principles, then that's again how we integrated it into process. And whenever design happens and there's a security review of the design, we can always circle back to that principle and keep like the resilience as a core principle for an offer development. Of course, depending again like of the criticality of the offer. So that's my take on it. Yeah.
Pedro,
So
Andy, yeah.
I was just going to extend that just a little bit because it's a callback to the question you've asked earlier about how do you decide what to fix first? And I would challenge us to say sometimes it's not thinking about a particular vulnerability that you might have, but instead start to classify groups of vulnerabilities. These are called common weakness enumeration, CWEs, instead of CVEs, common vulnerability enumeration, and start to look at vulnerabilities now as classes and say, if I'm going to build resilience in there, how do I prioritize where I need resilience first so that you can direct your resources appropriately? And this is an exercise that I've gone through and found some surprising results in there. Some of it was intuitive. We know that we have a problem here, but some of it was rather surprising to say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that when you look at this as an aggregate, we probably need to focus in this area to develop a higher level of resilience.
Makes sense. Interesting. Pedro, let me switch to you.
Using the data that we have available today. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, of course. Pedro, your work with critical software focused on energy and industrial automation. What is your perspective on how organizations are embedding resilience into systems at the design and runtime levels?
Allow me just for a quick sidestep here, because I really want to emphasize something that Nikola just said, and now Andy reinforced, which is what to fix first. And there's something that Nikola said that I really think it's crucial. So just because a vulnerability is marked as a critical vulnerability with a score of 9, it doesn't mean that it's more urgent to fix than one with a score of 8 or 7. You need to take that into your own context. So, and what I see organizations do is they just look at the number. So high criticality, fix first, but not recommended. So we really need to take that into our own context and consider our context for the evaluation there. Sorry for the sidestep. Regarding your question, what I see organizations do to embed resilience is, well, I think they are treating it as an architecture property and not the feature itself. So at design time, they are doing threat modeling, which is great. They are compartmentalizing trust zones. They are providing fail-safe defaults, and at runtime, they are monitoring their hardware for integrity, anomaly detection on their network. So all of these are things that I think are going great on organizations right now. What I also see is I think they are tending to they are looking for external guidelines, and I see a common guideline, which is the standard EX62443. So for the energy and the industrial automation, organizations are following 62443 to the heart to do risk assessment, secure design, to understand how to define the security zones of their system, and so on and so forth. And lastly, what I think organizations are also doing is they are maintaining resilience over time. So not just at the initial design. So all of these things we've been talking about, so generating S-bombs, none of this is to happen on a certain period in time and then forgotten. So this needs to be taken into consideration for every product version and to be done in a continuous way, basically. And this is what I think organizations are doing, and I find it positive.
Joe, kind of putting a button on this conversation here. Where do you see organizations doing this right? and or are you seeing organizations over-rotating on prevention alone?
Yeah, I think in general, just to be brief, that a lot of organizations remain reactive and they're chasing things after the fact, and that becomes exhausting and very difficult. And so to the extent that people can be more proactive, but building on what my colleagues on the panel are saying is I think prioritization and having good insight and good information is essential in order to be kind of proactive, whether that's early in your process or after you've deployed your products.
And everybody, how do you communicate this to business leaders and stakeholders? Is it a simple conversation? Do you have to play educator? Tell me about that.
Put it in their terms.
What does that mean, Andy?
Don't try going in there and talking about a particular attack or a threat actor that's out there. Go out there. If you're going to try to talk to executives, you have to put it in their terms. They talk about productivity. They talk about revenue generation. They talk about risks and risk management. So as a cyber professional, I have cyber professional discussions with other cyber professionals.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm talking to executives, I try to talk to them in their language.
Yeah. And I bet you focus on outcomes, right? They don't care about the how, they care about the what.
That's why you talk about risks and risk management, right?
Yeah.
Because then you can translate that into not only what the outcome is, but what that change in consequence will look like.
Interesting. All right, I'm going to let you guys catch your breath again. We're going to poll the audience one more time here. So if you could answer with that poll functionality in the portal, that would be great. Let's talk about which outcome drives most security investment decisions in your organization. So attendees, within your enterprises, which outcome drives most security investment decisions? Is it compliance requirements? Is it operational uptime? Is it risk reduction? Is it customer or stakeholder expectations? So let's give it a minute here and see what people respond with. Gentlemen, in your work, what do you see most commonly here? What's the biggest motivation?
So I frequently talk about drivers for cybersecurity programs. What's mm-hmm. behind that moves cybersecurity programs forward? And the strongest driver that I have experienced in my career by far is regulatory compliance. That's always the strongest. Now you would think, oh my goodness, I'm aware of a threat actor in my space. That threat intelligence tells me I should be doing something. That's actually one of the weaker drivers for people. People tend to think I lived through today, I probably will live through tomorrow. And when tomorrow comes, I could probably live through next week. But regulatory compliance, that carries a stick usually, and that pushes people along a little bit better.
Okay. Based on results here, yeah, compliance is a driver, as is customer or stakeholder expectations. So it's kind of split down the middle.
Yeah, that's like number 2. So.
Okay. Good. Validates the theory, Andy. Let's switch gears. Let's talk about translating security into business language. Andy, you just touched on that. How are we communicating this to clients? Technical initiatives to business priorities, aligning those two threads. Joe, do organizations still struggle to translate security into business terms? Why? And why is that? What are they getting wrong?
I think everyone does. I think everyone struggles to translate it into business terms. I think one of the easy ways to communicate things is when it's written down, like in a regulatory compliance, and says you need to do X or Y. That mm-hmm. becomes very clear. But in the absence of that, then there's various levels of risk tolerance and risk understanding, and that gap then leads to a cycle of trying to over-explain on the technical side, or try to gloss over the technical side and explain simply in business terms that people might not necessarily believe. So it's a constant struggle for everybody, in my view. And so it's really how to communicate is probably what separates the great security professionals from another. And you need to be able to speak at all levels of the organization and speak in all kind of languages, if you will, in business terms, in compliance terms, and regulatory requirements, and certainly in technical terms. And so organizations, or I'd say individuals, really need to invest in all three and really make sure they understand And when you're fluent in all three and can kind of be trilingual, if you will, then I think you have a much better chance of success.
Interesting.
And
Andy, you
persistent.
talk, yeah, Andy, go ahead.
I was going to say, and be persistent. Don't deliver the message once, but keep delivering the message and be consistent with that message and be persistent, and find all avenues to deliver that message, because they
Andy,
need to
you talked
hear it.
about
They need to
language a
hear
minute ago. What about metrics? What are some key metrics to communicate that really persuade business executives?
Metrics? Sorry, who did you ask? Did you ask me?
Andy, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah. So the key metrics, again, it's the same thing as translating into their business terms, talking to them in their terms. Any metrics that you develop have to be in productivity management, in revenue protection, in risk management. So those are going to be the key metrics that matter to executives. But if you're retraining that conversation to engineers, who have to deploy, now you have to put out there, okay, so how will these security metrics, I don't know, impact system performance? So you have to be ready for different kinds of metrics at different levels in the organization.
Okay.
And the experience will tell you what those are.
Absolutely. I just wanted to add, to me, like a good rule of thumb is to make sure you understand the P&L of executive you're trying to support. And, to this question right here, I would actually respond with a risk reduction that drives investments, because we have like a strong risk management process, which ties back directly to the P&L of a unit. And it's not only about, like I'm saying as a rule of thumb, a P&L, but you really need to become a trusted advisor of your executive team. So you need to understand strategy, where they're planning to roll out their products, their market segments of market, and so on. So you can represent actually the risk in their own terminology, what Andy is saying here. So if you're able to speak their language in terms of how it may affect their future trajectory, their KPIs and P&L ultimately, I think you can be very successful in kind of mapping that to the budget needs and to any other actually security control needs that you may have. So that translates to security budget eventually. Yeah.
You're talking outcomes. Pedro, can you give an example of these technical security decisions really impacting uptime, safety, system performance, et cetera?
Yes, I can. So, for instance, if you look at patch management on the safety critical domain, so imagine you have a safety critical controller and you find a critical vulnerability, but any software change requires a full revalidation cycle before deployment. So here's the dilemma. If you patch too fast, you skip the safety process. And if you wait, you are exposed. So again, that's the tension that you need to manage. Another example would be adding encryption to a constrained embedded device. So it's the right security decision, but it may introduce latency or a performance issue. So you are trading one problem for the other. Again, the dilemma or the pattern is the same. If you have these decisions, if they are made earlier, like we are saying, maybe you don't need the trade-off. If they are made late, then you have to choose, basically.
Okay, and all these tactics that we've been talking about today necessitate a mindset change or a shift in perspective. We've discussed that throughout the presentation here today. From all elements, early adoption in the process to the larger topic of changing cybersecurity, the impression of it from a problem to an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Closing question here before we get into the Q&A section. One practical step organizations can take to make security more of a business enabler. What's a big win? What's a surefire win as we move forward with smarter security?
Well, it's not going to be there's a silver bullet out there and there's one magic thing to do. I think we've said it a few times in different ways through the conversation here today, but it's really about bringing cybersecurity into the culture, and just have it part of the regular conversations that are taking place. And I don't mean hey, we have to put a firewall in place, but more, we need to have a conversation about what does our internet connectivity look like for our plant. Is it necessary? Does it bring additional risk? If we want something, does it bring additional risk? So I really think that if the culture can start thinking about cyber risk, just like they think about safety risks and they think about productivity, challenges to productivity, it just becomes part of the normal conversation. Thus, the funding, the engineering, the rollouts, all of it is just part of how the culture works then in an organization.
Sure. Excellent.
Yeah,
All right. Well, let's recap. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I?
No,
Anyone
just
else?
quickly, I 100% agree here. I just wanted to kind of share maybe a practical advice, and that would be take a look at the business KPIs today, and if you recognize security there, and that's great. If you have friction with your security program in any of the practices out there, see how you can reflect that into the business success KPIs, and that's where you need to work on to kind of improve the success of your own program. So that's like the key thing that I would do after this call.
Okay.
And I think there's a great opportunity here where people are concerned that AI might introduce more vulnerabilities than we can handle. And instead of being afraid of that, I think an opportunity then, a very practical next step is assume AI is going to increase the vulnerabilities that get disclosed or get discovered, but use that then to kind of reset and assess your methodology, your culture, your preparedness to adapt and move fast, because AI moves at machine speed. We all know that. We need to use that as an opportunity to reset our understanding of our processes and our methodologies and our software development process itself.
Yeah,
I agree. Just to finalize the round, so I agree that AI will definitely accelerate both the attacking side and the defending side, and we really need to take that into consideration. And just one more thing, I know it's very specific, and we've talked about this a few times, but I do think that this one specific practical step is still being largely unaddressed, which is the SBOM. So without an SBOM, there's no vulnerability management, there's no incident response, and now with the new regulations, there's no regulatory compliance. So if I had to address a specific step, it would be the SBOM part.
Interesting. All right, before we move into the Q&A section, and again, a prompt to the webinar attendees, please do submit your questions with that question icon on the left side of your screen. Recapping today's key points. Security and operational goals should support each other, obviously. Resilience must be built into modern systems from the start. That was a theme that we touched on throughout the presentation here today. Risk management must scale with software complexity. And organizations that align security with business priorities move faster and operate more confidently. Guys, Joe, anything to add on that front?
I think that nails it. And I love kind of marrying the business case with the regulatory compliance and the technical side. It's why cybersecurity is such an interesting field in the first place.
Amen.
Right.
Excellent. All right, we have just a couple minutes for Q&A. Let me look in the hopper here and see let's address this first one here to the full team. How will AI, we just touched on AI a little bit, how will AI reshape cybersecurity for OEMs and end users?
In every way.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But you're being serious, Andy, right? I mean, it's that comprehensive, correct?
So AI, generative AI is going to be used to help extend the ability of the product suppliers, the OEMs, in producing code and producing tools to check the code and producing design decisions. So it's going to be extending that. At the same time, AI is going to be used to check that code for vulnerabilities, not just at the code writing level where we accidentally made a mistake, but design flaws. So AI is taking on not just code generation, but software engineering capabilities as well. This means that everything's going to be happening a lot faster. And so, Pedro mentioned a moment ago that defenders, that's the manufacturers and the people deploying the systems, they're going to use AI. Adversaries are going to be using AI as well to stress those systems and look for where the vulnerabilities exist. It's all going to be scaling up. It's all going to be going faster. And so we all have to be prepared. And I don't mean to say we have to be prepared and to scare everybody into, oh my God, I'm getting behind. Just take that first step. Just take the first step and engage with one of the AI models and start to ask it questions about cybersecurity, about operational cybersecurity. You'd be amazed at some of the stuff that comes back. Yeah, you have to have a little bit of wariness. It can hallucinate, but you can get some really good stuff and some really good conversations going very fast with an AI. You'd be surprised. And they're not judging you. The AIs aren't judging you.
Not yet.
That's what we think, at least.
I think we have time for one more question here, and I'll throw this out to the larger group. I love forecasting when we have these discussions. So the question is, what does an effective resilience strategy look like over the next 3 years or 5 years?
I'll answer, but I've answered already, so I'm going to give somebody else a chance.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm happy to jump in. I'm happy to jump in, and
yeah, Joe.
I like the idea of more and more stuff moving left and being solved earlier in the process at a lower cost. And I think resilience means that overall security, the cost of security has gone way down. And I think AI is a tremendous enabler of that. And there's tremendous opportunity to do that. So for me, resilience means far lower cost to support security. And security is part of quality, and it's built into the software development process. And I think with that, there's far greater uptime. There's fewer patching problems and exhausting patching. There's a better, more resilient system in general that's lower cost of support.
And really, Joe, that's a software engineering response more than a cybersecurity response, but it's spot on. It's absolutely spot on.
Thank you.
Excellent. Wonderful. Well, we're coming up against the end of the hour here. So very sharp stuff, guys. I appreciate you sharing your expertise with us here today. I want to thank Nikola, Andy, Pedro, and Joe for joining us today. We're wrapping up the presentation. Attendees, before you go, you can please take our exit survey at the conclusion of this broadcast. Let us know what you think. Remember, there are resources, a couple white papers from RunSafe in that resources tab on the portal here. On behalf of Endeavor B2B and Automation World, I want to thank our sponsor, RunSafe Security. And I want to thank the webinar attendees for joining us today as we continue to explore this world of automation.
Thanks, everyone, for attending. Thanks for your questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.